Welcome to What the Health, an independent approach to your health span. Have you noticed how our healthcare system may not have your best interest in mind? Join Dr. Eckel in this fun and sometimes disturbing exploration of the state of healthcare and what it means for you. Now, here's your host, Dr. Eckel.
Welcome back, everybody. This is What the Health, and sometimes it's fun and sometimes it's disturbing, and we might get a little bit of both of those on today's show with Dr. V, and we're talking the gut-brain connection, and Dr. Elena is the founder and chief health coach of Modern Holistic Health, which I'm excited to dive in and talk with her about. She's also the creator of the Healthy Body Restoration System and Balance Your Brain program. And we were talking before we got on here, and we said, look, if we're talking on the same show, it's got to be around brain health. And so it is going to be riveting. Dr. V is also known for her work in the field of epigenetics and has studied under leading methylation and genetic doctors, including Dr. Kendal Stewart, and has been featured in numerous documentaries and summits so that she can share knowledge that is helping people overcome their chronic health struggles. Dr. V, welcome to What the Health.
It's so great to be here. So excited to be here with you today.
I am very excited to talk to you about what you've been cooking, what has been going on, because you're making some amazing components with mental health and brain health and really putting it into the category of, hey, this is a central nervous system issue here. It's not just over here where you go see your counselor or psychiatrist. It's a medical condition. And, one kind of starting out, I would like to love for you to address, how would one know if they have a brain chemistry imbalance, and what are some key signals or symptoms to know that you should get tested or checked out?
Well, the symptoms of brain chemistry imbalance can be many, right? Like there can be a lot of different symptoms. And I think the most important thing is to learn to not shove our symptoms under the rug. Like we need to pay attention to it before it turns into a destructive disease, and so some of the symptoms can include depression, anxiety, inability to focus, right? Where you're having maybe mood swings, or you're staying in one type of mood, like staying depressed all the time, maybe. You could have, on the more severe end, you could have issues where you're not just having small lapses in memory, like where did I lose my keys? And that's happening to you all, every day during the week. But it could be, things like you start to forget your dog's name, you start to forget your kid's name. You start to forget things about like your, I'm going to say patients, because this happened to me when I was younger. I started forgetting my patients' names. I couldn't remember their stuff. I had to like look in the charts. I couldn't remember what my staff was telling me. And tremors can be an issue, a big sign of a brain chemistry issue. Sleep issues can be a sign of brain chemistry issues as well. And so, there can be a lot of different things going on. And some of them we may think that it's just old age, which is a lie. Sometimes we might think, well, I'm just too stressed. Well, that could be a part of it, but this stuff is not normal, and this stuff needs to be addressed sooner than later.
Yeah. So with, I think always the listeners and viewers of What the Health, they know that that's a cop out and really just total BS. Like, oh, get used to it. You're getting old, right? That is not, we've got 91-year-old patients saying they're sharper at 91 than they were at 81. So we know that is healthy aging. That's what we promote. And there are a lot of things that we can do around that. I love the component of bringing in depression, anxiety, and really bringing it into a neurologic condition, because that's really what these are. And you have been really leading the charge at making sure that they are actually in neurology and not just in psychotherapy or counseling, which are great adjuncts, but really looking at this brain biochemistry and imbalances at that level. So for all of these early kind of brain chemistry signals for folks, and we see now with COVID, folks that have COVID, the research is now showing it's greater than 30% are having some neurodegenerative states after many months after having the virus. So, neurology and neurologic neurodegeneration, this is really on the rise for a variety of reasons. So what do you have for folks that, I always see these patients through time that they say, I'm just going to be on these antidepressants the rest of my life because I have a biochemical imbalance. What do you tell them?
Well, first of all, a lot of the people I see, they don't come to me saying that. They come to me saying, damn it, I've tried these medications. I've been on them 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20, 30, and I'm worse than I was before. They're not working for me. I started on a low dose of, Zoloft. Now I'm up at 350 milligrams of Zoloft. Yeah. Or I started at a low dose of one medication. Now I'm at the max dose and I'm on 2 or 3 other medications that are psych meds too. And so, people are waking up and they're realizing that, while medications can provide a beautiful safety vest to keep you afloat, to buy you time to figure out what's really causing the problem, it's not fixing the problem. And it's not getting to the root cause of the problem. Instead, it's just allowing the problem to fester and get worse. And people are realizing that. And last year, with all of the craziness that was going on in 2020, people who were already on the edge, just barely keeping their emotions in check, a lot of these people went over the edge. We've seen an increase in suicides. We've seen a massive, stark increase in anxiety and depression. I'm sure when the statistics come out, we are going to see stats showing an increase in deaths from brain-related disorders like neurodegenerative diseases, which it's already scary at how high the deaths are due to those numbers. And that's the deaths. If you look at statistics, the deaths due to neurodegenerative disease have skyrocketed since the 70s.
Yeah.
And that's deaths. That's not including all of the homes. Have you seen how many homes have popped up across the United States that are specifically for patients with neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's? Like, we should all be paying attention to this because this is not normal and it's not okay. And our approach when people come to us, they're on their last thread of hope. They are looking for help. Their doctors have written them off saying, there's really nothing else we can do for you. Just take these medications.
Yeah.
And these people are like, please, can you help me? And I start the process of educating them on the human body and how we are a mind, body, and a spirit. And we have to address all the components. And what are the most common underlying causes of brain-related disorders and neurodegenerative disease? And I like to divide that up into a pie and talk about all the different underlying causes.
I love that. And I'm guessing that would be what you've put together in a program for folks and your critical thinking around all of the different facets that go into treating the mind, the body, and the spirit of the kind of heart-centered dynamic being moving through time and space that come into you. So, yes, I mean, I guess I would reframe my question as well, in that it's people that they're stuck in the system, they're on the plethora of medications and they keep getting turned up, but they're so frightened because they've gotten that signal from the psychiatrist, the drug prescriber, saying you don't ever stop these because you have a biochemical imbalance, or they've been on them for 20 some odd years, where when you look in the research and like you stated, it's like it should just be kind of the life raft of 6 weeks to maybe keep your head above the water until you can make some of these lifestyle or really dig down and get at the underlying root imbalances. So that aspect of, with what is the brain, kind of the balanced brain body restoration program, and how does that work? Like, what have you put together to help support folks in this?
Well, that's a great question. So The program is based on the foundations of understanding that if we remove the interferences to healing and health, if we can identify them, we can remove them. Once we remove the interferences to healing and health, the body can then restore on its own because it's got its own system in place. It wants to be in a state of health. Then we can go and we can optimize. And so we teach people that when we're looking at brain related stuff, we're not just looking at the brain. We're looking at the entire body. We're looking at every systemic engine in the body. We're looking at the gut and how it relates to the brain and how it influences the brain. We're looking at the endocrine system and how it's relating to the brain. We're looking at the metabolic system and how it's influencing brain function. We're looking at the immune system and how it's influencing brain function. We're looking at genetics and how they influence brain function based on the environmental factors around them, because we know that our genetics are not controlled by the genes themselves. We control the expression of our genes. We control if our genes are going to work for us or against us. And that's based on our environmental factors like environmental chemicals. Are we in a clean environment or are we in a toxic environment? What kind of foods are we eating? Are they literally toxic to our bodies and our gut and our brain, or are they healing for our body's systemic engines? What about mycotoxins like mold? What about some people call them infections, like bugs or other microorganisms that don't play well with our ecosystem and can actually cause chemical changes to the brain. And then finally, trauma or heightened emotional experiences. We have been taught in this society here in the United States and many other societies around the world, we just shove it down. We shove it down and we pick ourselves up by our bootstraps and we just keep on going. Well, that doesn't work. Holding emotions and burying emotions inside of you, or traumas or heightened emotional experiences that happened from conception until right now, this present moment, or that happened in like generational traumas a trauma that happened to your mom or your grandparents or your great-great-great-grandparents that literally changed the genetic expression and will be passed down for 7 generations. This is science, y'all. This is science. It's not woo-woo. We know that these types of things can affect people's health and drive people into illness or sickness. And so when we address the person, we're looking at every facet of their being, mind, body, spirit. We're looking at everything. Are they living in their truth? Are they speaking their truth? Are they congruent with their truth? Have they had traumas? Are they living with self-limiting belief systems or constructs that are literally killing them and making them sick, that they just haven't been able to open their eyes enough to see? They've been raised with blinders on and they don't see what's really going on around them. Is it something like, chemicals, because maybe they live near an industrial area or they live near a farming area that's being sprayed with chemicals all the time, or they live on a golf course? And we look at all of these different facets of the human condition. And by looking at all of those and looking under every single rock, we can start seeing what's going on that's affecting this person, that's not allowing them to heal. And most of the time, there's more than one thing going on. Most of the time, there's a handful of different things, and they compound on top of each other. And the body can only handle so much before it starts to get symptoms. And so our job is just to play detective and uncover. And then in our programs, we show people how to use these tools, how to dissect and interpret their labs, when is appropriate, when it is an appropriate time to reorder their labs to see their progress, how to put protocols together and what the supplements are used for. How to use different types of very effective techniques to uncover and cut the cord, so to speak, on traumas that have happened to you and subconscious belief systems, how we can repattern our brain, our neurology. So we address all of these things, and that's why our programs are so successful.
I love it. And you're seeing people around the country, around the globe. What's your reach on these programs?
We are seeing people around the world.
I love it. Yeah. So it has been, what are some of the surprises or some of the connections that you're like, wow, I hadn't even considered that as being maybe an underlying root imbalance for folks? I'll put you on the spot with that question.
Um, so we're always learning and we're always uncovering more. The one that I've been diving into that I haven't come out publicly to start talking about it yet, are the talking about how the data doesn't lie until it does.
Mm-hmm.
Which is really more of an exploration into our limited knowledge of science. We think we know so much, but we really know so little. And how the world is evolving so quickly right now. We literally are evolving as a species. We are evolving on a mind, body, and spirit level very, very quickly. And how we can uncover even generational and past life traumas that still literally have a grip on our genetic expression and on our physiology, and how when we can uncover that and release those traumas, how literally the physiology of the body can change. And I have been tracking a couple of case studies using lab data so that we can see that when these individuals work through when they work through this trauma and they do this somatic type healing and this repatterning of the neurons in their brain, of the pathways in their brain, how their physiology is literally changing. And that's absolutely incredible. And that's fairly new. I've been diving into this for a little bit over a year now.
Oh, that's really cool. So you're tracking with lab values or other objective findings as they kind of peel the onion, so to speak, and get down to root causes and noticing the changes physiologically as well as mental, emotionally, and energetically. That's fascinating. And also it's really great to include those in, the collective information to show like, actually, these are real world changes happening for people, right? It's not just you made it up in the head, like you're actually showing physiologic change on, this objective laboratory data, that is so exciting I can't wait to see when you put that forth in out in a paper there.
Absolutely. I can't wait to put this out in writing and to talk about this because it's absolutely fascinating to see physiologically how the body can change, how eyesight can improve, how someone can come out of menopause, things that can be tracked with data so that you can actually see how these changes are happening when nothing was prescribed for the eyes or when no hormone therapy was prescribed for the individual. Absolutely fascinating. So I'll be excited to get on another talk with you in the future and show you what I've been finding.
I love it. I love it. So the components around, you mentioned genetic testing. We're not our genes, but they, I just saw a patient this morning. They said, I have this well, they didn't say heterozygous MTHFR. They said, I have one of the SNPs for the MTHFR. Am I just screwed, doc? And, it is lots more and more. We are using genetics in medicine. And understanding what the particular platform may be for a patient or a person. How do you all handle that in your program?
That's such a great question. I would love for more people to have easier access to education about their genes because, first of all, our genetics changing, that's a process of evolution. That's exciting and it's amazing. What we really need to do is understand how this process of evolution, how these SNPs or these mutations are serving us and stop focusing on the past. We need to look at how these things are serving us because, for example, certain mutations in certain genes can make people more tolerant to pain. It can make people handle massive stress where they can still just focus and dial in, right? Where other mutations can make people, better able to tolerate more harsh environmental conditions. And so, I like to teach people that, you are not messed up because you have a change that has occurred in your gene. Instead, let's approach this from a different way. And let's take a look at what your genes are telling us about how this Ferrari really runs. How does your engine, how does your body, how does it run? What fuel do you need? What environmental changes do you need to make? What do you need to do so that you can optimize all of your engines and keep them running optimally for you? That's how the genes should be looked at. And you can't just look at one gene like the MTHFR 677T or the MTHFR 1298C. You can't just look at those and understand anything about what's going on with your methylation engines. Your methylation engines are some of the biggest genetic engines in your body. So if you wanted to make a comparison, you could say that the methylation engines are like the size of the sun. And, and we know how big that is in comparison to all the planets. And then you've got a lot of other genetic engines that are like the different planets in the solar system. They're a lot smaller than the sun, and they rely on the sun's energy in order to maintain orbit and to do whatever they're doing in their ecosystem, right? And so that's kind of the same thing. Like, we need to look at our genetic engines as a whole and look at it in relation to all of the other genetic engines in our body. And so looking at just MTHFR, I tell people, like, that tells you nothing about your body. Why don't we run a panel that's actually going to do you some good? Let's look at your genetic engine so that we can better understand how you need to be eating, how you need to be supplementing, how you should be sleeping, how you need to be managing stress, and how toxic of an environment can you really handle? Because some people can handle more toxins than others before their body finally starts to break down.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is so true. I mean, you look at it, when I started learning about heavy metal, environmental medicine and heavy metals in particular, I tested so many people for heavy metals and realized, oh no, we all have heavy metals in our system. Is it causing you your health problem? And I think for some, it definitely is, in particular neurodegeneration, but there's also that genetic platform of, what can you tolerate? Some people can tolerate a lot more toxicity than others. It kind of makes me think of George Burns. Do you remember him? He played God in the movies. For those that are younger, you'll have to just check him out. But he was a comedian, and he was smoking cigars and drinking whiskey. And they asked him, he was 98 years old. And they said, George, what do your doctors say? He says, oh, they say nothing. They're all dead. And so he had a strong genetics. Like, he could put that, booze, the whiskey and the cigar smoke in daily, day to day, and not have any health consequences. Now, I don't know that he had none, but he was still alive and he outlived his doctors. Right.
Yeah. So and this is the other thing with George Burns. If you go back and you just, read about him and learn about him, the guy let everything pretty much roll off his shoulders. Like, that guy, he did not harbor anger. He did not harbor emotions. He just, did not give a shit.
Yeah.
He did not give a shit about anything.
Yeah.
And, if you look at all the centurions around the world, they have that same mindset. Yeah. They let stuff roll off their shoulders. They're not holding on to emotions. And there are some of them who have been through some major traumatic stuff. Like, they've been alive long enough to see some big worldwide trauma, right. And they just move through it with grace and ease. They allow themselves to feel their emotions. They move through their emotions. They seem to somehow know intuitively that they are a spirit zipped up in this Ferrari, in this body, yeah. And they're here to drive and have an experience during the course of their lifetime here on Earth. And they let stuff go. They're not holding it in. And George Burns was one of those. And I think that that's one of the reasons that he lived so long, even though he smoked cigars and drank whiskey.
Yeah. And nothing against either of those behaviors, but I think just the amount that fella did, it does speak to the genetics component. Like, I think he was given also some really good, some good genes. He just had a different platform where, some of my patients, I'm sure you're seeing them too, are more like the opposite end of that, are the canaries at the beginning of the coal mine of, can't even go into the shopping center because of the perfumes on aisle number 9. They get the whiff of them right at the entrance of the store, and it just, with chemical sensitivities, it just wipes them out. So we've got all of these different components, multifactorial. The genetic aspect is interesting. I always put a big asterisk when I talk about it with people of like, hey, we're going to test you for these. It doesn't mean that they're firing or not. And like you said, we actually do have control of whether they're turned on or off, or if they're functioning or not, right?
Absolutely, we do. And it's just by, getting with somebody like you or like myself who can really give people a whole new perspective on how do I look at my genes to understand how I can turn switches on and off to get my body to heal and to run optimally, and one of those things is mindset. And so, I guarantee you that all of your patients and mine, there's trauma in there that hasn't been dealt with. Yes, there's chemical toxins. Yes, there's, heavy metals. Yes, there's, all these other things. There's all the things. There's always all the things. You got a ton of stuff going on, but there's always an emotional component, always, whether it was in their lifetime or in a previous lifetime or even generational. And when we can uncover that, that can literally get genes to switch on and off in an instant.
Yeah. So that aspect, so in treating kind of the mind, body, spirit aspect and that ancestral trauma, personal traumas, lifetime, many lifetimes, what are you finding is most effective for folks, or uncovering limiting beliefs? That's a big one, because we don't even know our blind spots. When we're dealing with, somebody's just coming in like, I'm just depressed and I have anxiety. Like, I want that gone. I tried the medicines. They're not working. They kind of help maybe a little bit, but it wrecked my libido or whatever the side effect was from the drug. How do you kind of venture into that realm with them?
I venture into it right at the very beginning. When people come to us and they want to talk to us because they want help. I sit down, and much like I'm doing with you today on this interview, I educate people on our approach and why our approach is different and why it's working so well for so many people. And I talk about all the underlying causes. And amongst those, I talk about that as one section of the pie of underlying causes. And I talk to people about that. And then I give them the opportunity to ask questions about it.
Yeah. Okay, so let's do that. Let's talk about it. So what is that aspect of, okay, I'm coming in to see you, and for our listeners, viewers, they may have this question for their loved ones, or, because we are seeing this really rampant in our society right now around depression, anxiety, skyrocketing rates, right? With lorazepam or the benzodiazepines prescription in the first 3 months of the pandemic going up 34% or something like that. I haven't even checked in on that stat on just the drugging of America, with not really addressing, well, like, what is the underlying trauma, right? So I'm looking for alternatives, Dr. V.
All right. So, excuse me, let me tell you a little story, a little bit of an example of this approach. There was a woman, very, very successful woman, who was in her late 40s, who came to see us. And she had an amazing history. Like, she's had quite the experience in her lifetime. And, just generalizing some things, she started having some traumatic events happen to her from the age of 3. And, but she had, and in her early adult life, all the way up into her early 30s, she had a lot of struggle, a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression. She ended up getting really, really sick. Amongst her physical and mental health issues, she started going into menopause. She started into perimenopause in her 30s. And, she ended up becoming very ill. She ended up losing everything she had, business, home, all of that. And she ended up doing a lot of work to heal herself, and she made phenomenal progress. So by the time she came to us, she still had some holes that she wanted to fill. She was thinking she wanted to optimize, that she had already hit her optimal health and was ready to optimize. And when we started talking to her, I just started digging in, just getting more of a history. And she started talking to me in more detail on her timeline of heightened emotional experiences or traumas that had happened in her lifetime, followed by talking to me about how she had worked through that. She had this help or had that help or did this modality or that modality, and she worked all through that. And that's why she was at the successful and healthy place that she was and wanted to optimize. But I kept seeing some holes in there. So I kept digging in a little bit further. And I asked her, I talked to her about, that I, intuitively felt, because this is something you can't test for. This is the one thing that there's not really a test for it. You just have to, work with someone who's experienced and knowledgeable and who has intuition about these things. So I started talking to her about it, convinced her to fly in to Austin for some intensive trauma work, and asked her if she was open to that, because I told her, look, you have nothing to lose. You have nothing to lose. If you're really wanting to optimize, I think that we need to uncover this stone too. And it turned out that there were some unresolved traumas that she had buried so deep that she didn't have an emotional charge to any of those things. Because she didn't have an emotional charge attached to any of these old traumas, she honestly believed that she had worked through those traumas because she could talk about it and didn't have any emotional charge. There was no anger, sadness, anything, right? And we ended up working through some of that stuff, and she ended up coming out of menopause.
Wow.
And her eyesight is also getting better. And that's incredible too, because there is data to show from her eye doctor what her prescription was. So we're tracking that. And so as she's working through these traumas, her physiology is literally changing. See, she is reverse aging. She is literally optimizing now by way of not taking a peptide or not taking a supplement, and all that biohacking stuff is good. But another part of biohacking that not enough people are talking about is working on this kind of stuff, working on getting congruent and in alignment with your mind, body, spirit, and uncovering and releasing any traumas that are still there that you had no idea that were there. Your body will literally change in front of your very eyes.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is that foundational component, right? I mean, we can get all sophisticated and fancy with all the supplementation, injections, et cetera. But that aspect is really, you're treating the heart in Chinese medicine. The heart is the empress or the emperor, and it's all heart-centered container for everything else outside of that. So by addressing kind of those blind spots of, like you're saying, she had no emotional charge. She felt like she handled it all. When you look at the ACE scores at least in North America, which are the adverse childhood events, really nobody gets out of here alive. There is a lot of trauma in the birth, being in this plane of existence. And so, there are those that say, well, I dealt with that. I dealt with that in my teens, or I dealt with that in my 20s, and I'm done with it. But we do see a cyclical nature for our patients, in that those old stories of maybe childhood trauma or teen trauma, or even unbeknownst to them, it could have been their great grandparents, right? We're seeing that with Holocaust survivors there was a lot of anxiety, depression of folks that had relatives in the Holocaust. We see it with the Montreal database of there was a big freeze in Montreal, and showed the epigenetic changes through time for generations. And so this is, I think it's one of the secret components for, it shouldn't be a secret anymore. I mean, we've got the Body Keeps the Score that really kind of was groundbreaking in tying it all together for folks. But having more and more people in the dialogue, sharing this story. So for you all listening, again, this is What the Health. And I've got Dr. V on the line here, and we are talking about brain health. And this is one of these things, like if this is resonating with you, just think of two people, share the show with them, because this is where change happens. And this is, this is the stuff that gets swept under the rug for families in your insular family or in the community. And it is so ubiquitous. We're seeing it in our clinics. We're seeing it around the globe. And by addressing these types of topics, it really does help healing on a grand scale of events. So, share this show. That's why I created the platform. That's why I have Dr. V coming on here talking about her program, because she is helping thousands of people around the globe. And this is one of the pieces we arrived at. I was going to ask you about neurotransmitter testing, and we got into, the piece that you really can't measure, which is this, hidden traumas and or the limiting belief aspect of our minds. What other, I guess, on that same vein, because that's a juicy topic to hear, by just expressing it or uncovering it. So this is not like the counseling of old, of you're on, I think of Woody Allen movies of, they're sitting down and they're, you just tell me your life story here and we're going to just write it down for you. Right.
Yeah.
Are there certain therapies that you're seeing folks get that are resonating with people now? I mean, I'm sure it's different for each person, but in general, there's some newer kind of body-centered things that we've got going on now for people.
Absolutely. I mean, there are therapies that are, in my opinion, and just what I see clinically, that are much more effective than traditional talk therapy. And that's not to say that talk therapy doesn't have its place, but for all you listeners out there, listen very closely to what I say. If you've been in talk therapy for years and you're still in talk therapy, why are you still in talk therapy? Why? Mm-hmm. If you've been in it 3, 5, 15 years, how much money have you spent with no resolution of the problem? Does that not piss you off? Come on, guys, sit back and wake up. We have been brainwashed. Talk therapy, every time that you sit down and rehash an emotional event or a traumatic event, do you know that your body does not realize the difference between that it happened 15 years ago and it's happening again right now as you speak it? Have you ever wondered why you feel so exhausted and sick for hours to days after you have a really good, quote unquote, good therapy session because you just relived something again? That is not healing you. That is putting your body right back into that state of fight or flight and trauma that you experienced back when you actually had the experience. Your brain and your body cannot conceive that it was in the past, that it's not happening again now. And that, folks, is damaging. That's damaging. There's a time and a place to go back through that, but they're not using the right modalities to help you move through it and then cut the cord on it. So you sit there and you talk about it, all the emotions, all the charges come up. You literally put yourself back into fight or flight right as the hour or hour and a half is ending, and you walk out the door as if you had just relived that trauma again. Folks, this is not healthy. This is why people are still sick. Going to your therapist for that many years, why would you do that? Why? So there are other modalities that you can use. And some of the modalities include a lot of what some people would call woo type healing. You have like EFT tapping, you have quantum time therapy, you have conflict resolution. You can work with energy healers who can help, move you through these traumas, even sometimes without you realizing it on a conscious level. All you realize is that you feel better later. Resonance repatterning is an amazing tool that uses a multitude of different types of modalities to actually help a person to identify on a subconscious level and then cut the cord on a subconscious level, these different traumas and different things that have happened. And so like the work that we'll do with people is we have them fly in and we'll do either a 3-day intensive with them, or we put them through a 7-day intensive where they actually not only go through the healing modalities themselves, but they actually get certified in learning how to use several different modalities that can help remove these root traumas and help literally to repattern the brain with new healthy constructs and new healthy belief systems, you can repattern the brain. That's amazing. For those of you who are not familiar with plant medicine, get yourself familiar with it, learn about it, look it up, because plant medicine is on the horizon and it's getting ready to take over the whole world in the next couple of years. And it's going to help transform the world in a huge way because it increases neuroplasticity, helps to remove the critical factor, which is the frontal lobe of the brain that always is trying to be in control. Some people call that the ego. And it can help people move through massive traumas like PTSD and other lifelong traumas and other things. It can help them move through it seamlessly and painlessly very, very quickly. And so there are a lot of modalities out there that are being used now and are growing very, very quickly that are able to help move people through these types of traumas and stuff.
I'm right there with you, especially coming out of Oregon here. We've got really kind of on the forefront of getting that moving that is occurring now around the globe. But we do have, we just passed that measure up here on psilocybin assisted psychotherapy, which is so exciting. And it has been, it is such a powerful medicine for folks, and really, being put in that place and recognized for the transformational, basically the transformations that it makes. You read in Michael Pollan had his book, How to Change a Brain. And, in the interviews of people that have done therapies like this, they said it's at like top 5 peak experiences of themselves on the planet, so it's really profound. A profound change can occur, and different plant medicines have their different aspects and different benefits for folks. So if you are, I agree, like get out, get educated. This is not something to be doing out in, out in the field. You want, skilled folks with you, especially if you've got some, some significant health issues on the deck here. So I would encourage you to just, do it in a safe environment with a lot of love around you. That's for
exactly,
sure.
Exactly. And some of the your audience, they may have heard of ketamine being used for PTSD and other traumas to help people move through that. And, that's another substance that can be used that is, considered legal by the FDA, and it's something that's been in use for many years in the field of anesthesia. But one of the things that ketamine does is it is a dissociative. So it will dissociate you from the emotions that are tied to those different events. One of the biggest mistakes I see, the biggest mistake that I see around the country with ketamine clinics, is that it's being done by unskilled facilitators. There's no one facilitating. They will put these people on a ketamine IV and leave them in a sterile room in an environment to deal with their stuff on their own. And sometimes they don't even deal with it. They just kind of pass out, and whatever their brain is, wherever their brain goes, it goes. There's nobody to facilitate and lead them through the process of working through traumas. And, there's a process that needs to be done, whether it's something like ketamine or psilocybin or, LSD, that the research is being picked up by universities around the world on the amazing effectiveness for LSD in working with people with PTSD. Like one treatment can change their lives, but all of this stuff needs to be done by skilled facilitators who know how to take people through the process of uncovering and then cutting the cord on these different traumas. You can't just put somebody on a drug, whether it's legal or not, whether it's man-made or a plant, whether it's frog medicine or whatever it is. You can't just put somebody on this stuff and then think that it's going to magically do its process. It requires skilled facilitators who understand what they're doing.
Sure. Yeah. To help just kind of guide and keep some clear boundaries for folks to get somewhere where they want to go. Right. I'm looking forward to multiple conversations in the years to come with you, Dr. V, because that one is near and dear to me. I want to keep on our topic here on the gut brain health. So there is a piece that kind of leads into some neurotransmitters and, around testing, because people may have not heard of, I'm shifting gears from the deep profound back into more of a laboratory test for us. But with regards to things that we can change, I think a lot of the neurotransmitters are manufactured in the gut. We titled this talk our gut-brain connection here. And I wanted to talk about neurotransmitter testing and checking in on that front with folks as well, on what you've seen to be beneficial for folks on maybe they didn't know that they could get their neurotransmitters because their neurologist or their counselor, psychologist, they're not really thinking on the biochemistry front. Maybe provide us with some stories of patients you've helped around with some neurotransmitter imbalances and what those may look like.
Yeah, that's a really good topic to dive into. There are a couple of different tests that can be done to look for patterns of neurotransmitter activity in the brain and in the body. And yeah, there are some doctors in allopathic medicine who either don't know about those tests or they say, well, they don't work. My response is like, well, what you're doing isn't working. So like, what kind of success rate are you having? Because my success rate's like, over 95%. And I can show you that in my data. Like, what kind of success are you having throwing people on drugs, not even knowing what neurotransmitters need help? Most of the drugs that are out there are SSRIs. They're designed to prevent the breakdown of serotonin inside the synapse in the brain. And it's not always a serotonin issue. Sometimes it's a dopamine issue. Sometimes it's a GABA issue. And it's not always that these neurotransmitters are too low. Sometimes they're too high and they're causing the neurological issue. And sometimes it's other neurotransmitters altogether, like, epinephrine and norepinephrine. And so there are tests that can be done that are measuring metabolites or chemicals that come out in the urine. And by looking at the amounts of what certain chemicals are coming out in the urine, that can be backtraced or reverse engineered to understand how much of that chemical normally comes out. For example, if you're producing what is considered a normal amount of serotonin. And if you have a lot of that chemical, more than quote unquote normal or less than normal, then when you backtrack it, you can assume that there is a lesser amount of serotonin or a greater amount of serotonin than normal that's being produced in the body. But it doesn't stop there. That's just like the initial peak. Then we need to dive in and go, okay, so let's say, for example, that your dopamine is showing high and your epi and norepi are showing low. Well, what could be the cause of that? Let's see. We've got certain types of bacterial infections that can actually inhibit the DBH enzyme, like Clostridia, for example. They can inhibit the DBH enzyme, which is the dopamine converting enzyme in the brain. And when that happens, then dopamine can't convert into the next set of brain chemicals. You see, the body doesn't make dopamine so that it just stays dopamine. The body makes dopamine and it's used, and then the rest of it, the excess, is then converted to other brain chemicals that are needed for us to focus and sleep and remember things and feel good and have physical and mental energy and all that. And so, if we see high dopamine, low epi, norepi, I'm thinking as a differential diagnosis, if you even want to call it that, okay, is there a bacterial infection like Clostridia, for example? Or could it be certain mold toxins or mycotoxins, because they are also known to inhibit the DBH enzyme, right? Could it be even a genetic thing, which is very, very rare, but it can happen. And so there's a differential diagnosis right there of 3 different things. Mm. And so let's go in to the body and let's do some additional tests. And let's check your gut and your body to see if you're having any antibody responses to different types of bacteria like Clostridia and a few others that are known to cause this dopamine imbalance in the brain, this dopamine epi-norepi balance. Do we have that? Yes or no? And then we're going to look at genetics also. And then we're going to also look for any mycotoxins or chemical toxins that are also known to cause that problem. And we can see, okay, you have one of these things, or you have 3 of these things going on that are causing this dopamine to be high. And by the way, you have all the symptoms of high dopamine, like you're having tremors and you're having a lot of anxiety and you're not sleeping and all this other stuff. And look, we found 3 things. So this makes sense to me. So let's address these 3 things that are barriers to healing. Let's remove them out of the body. And then let's see how you're feeling symptom wise if all these symptoms of high dopamine go away. And we can also follow it up with another neurotransmitter test and see how the neurotransmitters have leveled out. And so like that's our approach if we're going to start with the first test being a neurotransmitter test. And the gut can cause massive issues because you're right, like your dopamine and serotonin are a couple of the chemicals that are made in your brain. They're made in your gut, not in your brain. So we need to understand like what's going on in the gut. Do you have these different types of infections in your gut that are causing the problem? And where else are they? Because I guarantee you, if they're in your gut and they've been there for a while, they're probably not just isolated to your gut. They're probably all over your body in your bloodstream, also causing an autoimmune response. Oh, you've got this autoimmune disease on top of your brain chemistry issue? Well, that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
So we just look at a bunch of data and then we educate the client on all these different things that are contributing to their issue. And then we start, working on it.
Love it. Love it. I love how you put that together in such a concise fashion. And it is why is this such a different approach than what we grew up with, right? All the time I get my patients, they'll come up and say, well, I might have to talk to my doctor about that. I'm like, well, why do you think they did not bring this up to you in the first place, right? They weren't trained. They're thinking in the box. Then they got no drug rep coming around saying, hey, we got to think outside the box here, people. So there's multiple roads to Wellville. And I love the multi-pronged approach. I do want you kind of to share, like, because you've got a lot of folks, it's not just their brain. They've got fatigue, weight loss, hormone imbalances, sleep issues, in addition to anxiety and depression. So how in particular does your Balance Your Brain program help people make the shift they need to restore their brain and body health?
That's a great question. Our program is designed on uncovering all the underlying causes by looking at all the lab data that we can look at and teaching the individual that for things that you can't test, like, unresolved traumas, unfelt emotions, things like that, these are all the things that we need to uncover. We need to see, is there something under that stone? What's under there that is causing a problem with the body? And our program addresses it exactly the way that we've been talking about. Our program addresses all the facets of the mind, body, spirit, all the facets of the human condition. We're looking at, everything and anything that could be contributing to the person's symptoms, including all their symptoms, not just their brain, because the brain isn't separate from the body. Every engine in the body, every systemic engine system relies on another system. They all work in synchronicity. They don't work apart from each other. And that's what makes us, you and I and other people like us, so different and so successful in what we do, because the doctors that are still practicing the antiquated model of medicine, they are looking at the systems as separate from one another, and the systems are not separate from one another, and they are looking at the body as if it's broken, and what can we give it to override this break in the engine? What can we give it to make the symptom go away so that the body's warning lights don't keep going off, rather than looking at the symptom as a clue that's telling us, hey, thank you for telling us that the check engine light is on. Let's look under the hood and let's see what is going on that's giving your body this set of symptoms. Let's be grateful for our symptoms because it's telling us a lot. And so that's the big difference between the work that we do and the allopathic model.
Yeah, that component between reductionistic separate systems, it's antiquated, and we see it's failing so many people right now, and more folks are looking for true underlying corrections of their health. And, I am always amazed. 21 years in medicine, I'm honored, first off, that people, come into the clinic and trust us with their healthcare. But to see what the body is capable of doing given the right information. You know, I like to say I do a lot of nothing all day. It's the body and it's the medicine, and it's those things together. Like the body just needs the information, and the symptoms are just saying, I love that. Just pay attention to me, pay attention to me. People, I always tell them, like, I'm just listening very well to what you're telling me. You're going to tell us exactly what we need to do, and we're going to listen to you, and we're going to give your body what it needs. And lo and behold, it actually can heal itself given the right information. So we remove obstacles to cure. So I'm so glad we wound at that component. So in closing, Dr. V, anything that you would like to share with our listeners of What the Health here today?
You know, our world as a whole, not just us in the United States, you know, it can be easy to forget what's going on in the rest of the world, but our world as a whole is sicker than it's ever been. And we are the sickest modern nation in the world. I don't know if you know that statistic, but we are the sickest modern nation, and everyone around the world thinks that we're the best. So everybody starts following what we do, from eating the crappy foods. I mean, you can go to any other country now and you can find McDonald's and all the crappy fast food that's there, and they're eating it, you know, to the medical care. They followed in our footsteps in medical care. Our medical system has failed. And the good news is that all of the corrupted agencies and ways of this country and the world, they are all crumbling right now. And what's coming up right behind it is this, folks. This is the future of medicine. This is the type of work that's healing people and that's going to help bring the world back to a state of health. And so pay attention, keep looking, open your eyes, become aware of this type of stuff. And, you know, reach out to Dr. Eckel, man. He knows his stuff. I respect Greg so much. He and I have had many conversations, you know, off camera about how things are changing in medicine. And we've even talked about collaborating on some things, because he and I, we see eye to eye on a lot of stuff, and we're helping a lot of people. And so, you know, keep looking and realize that getting rid of your symptoms is not the answer. It's finding the root causes and addressing the root causes of your symptoms that's going to give you long-term health and longevity.
Oh, well, thank you, Dr. V. Thank you for coming on What the Health. Everybody listening, viewing, share the show, go out, give us the 5-star reviews, because that's what makes a difference in people's lives. They want to see, and maybe write down what you learned off of today's show. If you've got something new, if you're going to get into action, that's my encouragement. Everybody, What the Health on the Contact Talk Radios, Tuesday, 2 to 3 Pacific time. We will see you next week. Thanks for tuning in.